Hello, hello. Thank you all so much for having me here today. Like she said, I am Elaine, and I'm here to talk to you guys a little bit about our favorite topic. I know, millennials, the mindset, and the minorities. So I only have a few minutes, so I'm going to go ahead and jump in. So what we're going to cover today, I'm going to tell you a little bit about me, my story, what I do, and why I do what I do. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the millennial mindset. I was told to pick one, so we're going to go over the biggest mindset difference that I think is causing people the most problems when it comes to the workplace. We're also going to talk a little bit about minority millennials and how the minority experience is a little bit different than what's being portrayed. And also we're going to talk a little bit about what can you do. So to start off, I am Elaine. Professionally, I went to a private school. I graduated from Columbia College in Chicago with a degree in marketing and media management. I am currently a trainer and coach. I work with leaders and companies to help engage and retain their millennial workforce. And personally, I am an African-American female, millennial, only child, and I am a self-proclaimed recovering jobaholic. I am the self-proclaimed recovering jobaholic because from the age of 15 to about 30, I had around 40 jobs. Yes, I know, 40 jobs. And to give myself some credit, I had multiple jobs at a time. Once I graduated college, I always kept a corporate 9-to-5 job, but in addition to that, I would always have at least one, sometimes two, part-time evening and weekend jobs. Millennials, we love our gigs on the side, so I accumulated a lot of jobs in that way. And usually when I tell people about my work history, they say, oh my goodness, you could not keep a job. And that's actually not the case. I have never been fired. I was always a peak performer, giving 110%. So the problem was jobs couldn't keep me, or more specifically, managers couldn't keep me. Because they say people don't quit jobs or companies, they quit their managers. So managers had a hard time keeping me. And that is why I do what I do. I get that question a lot. Andrew, why do you want to talk about millennials? Everyone's talking about millennials. Well, that's why, because there's a lot of chatter out there right now about millennials, and not very much of it is coming from millennials. And I wanted to contribute to the conversation and share about my experience and what I have witnessed at companies in terms of leadership, what changes could be made, what things could have been done to keep me in positions that I loved, companies that I loved, but ultimately left. There's a lot of things that I'm hearing, and the same adage, millennials that we're lazy, entitled, all of this stuff. We want beanbag chairs and snacks and all of these things to keep us entertained. And while all those things are great, I'm not going to turn down snacks. None of that would have kept me in positions. And some of the companies I worked for, they had all of that and then some, and that still didn't keep me. So there are some deeper things, some more things that I wanted to share. Everybody's giving their 2 cents about millennials, so this is a portion of my 2 cents. So to get into the millennial mindset, there's a lot of things that we can talk about when it comes to the millennial mindset. There are a lot of differences amongst the generations in terms of how we think, what we value, what's important to us. And I can talk all day about millennial mindset and the differences, but I was told to pick one, and the biggest one that I see, the biggest mindset difference that causes a gap in communication, it causes difficulties when managing and engaging millennials, is the mindset difference of job versus career. I believe that older generations, Generation X, baby boomers, they came out of college, or in some cases came out of high school, got into a career, and they stuck with it. There are so many Gen Xers and baby boomers that have been in their positions or have been in their companies or have been in their fields for 20, 30, 40, 50 years, because when they started, they looked at it as a career. And the difference with millennials is we often look at things as jobs. Like I said, I am a recovering jobaholic. I had 40 jobs, and not because they were entry level or because they wouldn't classify as careers. I just thought about it as a job. Oftentimes I had the same position, the same title, the same job duties as someone next to me, and they had a career and I had a job, because it's all in how you look at it. Because I worked since I was 15, once I got out of college, I had already had a lot of work experience. So by the time I graduated, I was able to get some pretty good jobs. Like, these weren't your average paper pusher, entry level kind of jobs. I was continuity director. I was a brand specialist. I was a portfolio specialist. I was a customer care specialist. I was sitting in positions with people who had been doing the same thing for years and years and years. And I came in as a millennial, and I looked at it as a job. And when you think about the difference between a job and a career, someone who believes they have a career, they're thinking of longevity, they're thinking of the future, they're thinking of investing time into a company and growing with the company, and this is a part of their life, and they see this company being a part of their life 5, 10, 20 years from now. When you think about a job, that's a means to an end. That's a paycheck. I'm coming here to get a paycheck. That's what that is. So obviously it is going to be a little bit more difficult, or at least different, to motivate someone who looks at it as a job versus someone who looks at it as a career. Because if I look at you as temporary, it's going to be very difficult to motivate me to go above and beyond for something that I'm not even sure that I'm going to want in a year. And when I talk to people about their biggest concern with millennials, and the biggest thing is motivation. I can't motivate them. I can't get them to put their phone down. I can't motivate them to do what I'm asking them to do. And understanding where that comes from can help you to better address it. Understanding that, okay, maybe they're not motivated because they don't see the opportunity. They don't see that this is a career, or that this is a viable option for them, or that this role, no matter where they're going, this role can play a huge impact on where they're trying to go, whether it's to be an entrepreneur one day or whether it's to go do something else. I was talking to a manager, and he said that he finally started getting some traction with his millennials because he acknowledged, like, okay, you might not see yourself here in 5 years, but tell me what it is you think you want to do. And he said, I help them to see what they're doing right now, how that can contribute to that. And we have a conversation about it. He's like, and we make a deal. I tell them that I acknowledge your aspirations on what you want to do in the future, but while you are here, can I get you to commit to giving me 100% while you are here? And keeping the line of communication open, so if there is a problem, or if you are feeling frustrated, or if that time of change is starting to come sooner than you expected, let's have a conversation about it. So acknowledging the difference in mindset, that a lot of millennials do see things as a job versus a career, and addressing those issues head on, having open conversations about that. Don't make anyone feel like they have to hide it, that they have to lie and say, oh yeah, I see myself being here 20 years from now. That's a lie, okay? No, they don't see that. We are just in a different time, and as much as we would love to have people think, yes, you're starting here today and you see yourself here 20 years from now, that's just not the reality. So it is in everyone's best interest to acknowledge that change and get ahead of it, and it starts with communication, talking about it, and not making them feel bad about it, because it is what it is. We are where we are. Let's see how we can get the most out of this relationship, make it a mutually beneficial relationship while you are here, and hopefully have an amicable separation when that time comes. So on to minority millennials. Now, the reason why I have such a passion for speaking about minority millennials is because that was my personal experience. And when I hear people talking about millennials and us being lazy and us hopping around from job to job and all of these things, it leaves out so much of my experience as a minority. And I wanted to address that because I don't think enough people are talking about the challenges that minority millennials face and how that compounds, everything else with just being a millennial. So when I started doing research, I wanted to get an understanding of the different generations. I knew what I thought of the different generations, but I really wanted to know, okay, what do the generations, what did they go through, what do they value? And when I started researching it, we have our matures and we have our baby boomers, and I read, baby boomers were, post-war, they lived in an abundant time, they're really loyal to their careers, and their jobs were their focus. Generation X, the latchkey kids, because the baby boomers were so focused on work, they had to go home alone, and they were very figure it out yourself, do it yourself, self-reliant, dedicated, loyal, still had that career mentality. And then you have us millennials who were raised by helicopter parents and who had our hands in everything, trying everything, every after-school sport, clubs, all kinds of things. We're just all over the place. And when I was reading the descriptions, it all seemed very general and not quite specific to me. So even though a lot of those things, those characteristics, those values and experiences cover a lot in general in terms of those generations, as far as the Black experience through those generations, I think it's safe to say that it's a little bit different. So you have to think of, so when I think of my generational timeline, when I think of my grandmother who dealt with desegregation and a lot of racism and really just didn't go to school, wasn't allowed to go to school, and grateful to get her job. She worked at the water company for 30 or 40 years, and how grateful she was for that job and worked and stayed there because of the climate and because it was so difficult to get a job as an African American woman, and balancing that. Then my mother, who was the first in our family to graduate college, and she got her master's, and she faced a lot of racism at school. She told me a story once that she had a teacher, she was the only Black student in her class, and she wrote a paper, and the teacher failed her because she said, "I know you can't write this good. I know you can't write this." And she had to go through all the channels. So she faced a lot of racism. So once she graduated, she went into St. Louis Public Schools, and she's been there for the last 30 years. And then she had me, and she wanted to give me every opportunity she could, because now I had more freedom than she had, and she had more freedom than my grandmother had. And so she put me in everything. She made a lot of sacrifices and sent me to a private high school, and she put me in every sport that I wanted to try, every after-school club, every summer camp you can think of. And then I went from there into corporate America. I went from there to college and then into corporate America. And being in a private high school, it was predominantly white. And even though there were, I think out of 500 students, 10 African American students. And in our classes, I was the only African American in the class. And it was very much, you should be grateful to be here. At the time, we didn't have the term microaggressions, but it was very much a thing back then. And microaggressions are the everyday verbal and nonverbal environmental slights, snubs, or insults, whether intentional or unintentional, which communicate hostile, derogatory, or negative messages to target a person based solely upon their marginalized group membership. So microaggressions, intentional or unintentional, often based in stereotypes or something negative. And at the end of the day, because it is intentional or unintentional, you might not mean it, people might not mean it, but certain statements and certain things make minorities or make anyone feel less than or like an other, like they are separate, like they are different. And throughout high school, it was microaggressions, and it was comments, and it was things like, you shouldn't complain. You guys always have something to say. You always have a problem. You always have a problem. Just be happy. Just be grateful that you're here. So when things did come up, when issues did come up, we didn't feel like we could say anything because we should feel grateful that we were there. And I carried that with me into corporate America, where I felt much of the same thing. Except this was a job, so I was grateful to be there. I was grateful to get the job. And so because I, one, was grateful, and two, people treated me like you should be grateful, I accepted a lot of things. I accepted the microaggressions. I accepted the racism. I accepted being given more responsibility than I should have been given, more jobs than I should have been given, without asking for a raise, without saying that I was burnt out. Staying at the office till 10 p.m. and struggling to get there for the 8 a.m. huddle, but not wanting to say anything because I should be grateful to be there. It weighed on me, and so I was in a perpetual cycle of getting burnt out, getting frustrated, and instead of saying something, because I didn't know how to go to my manager with certain things, I didn't know how to communicate to human resources without getting in trouble or without it backfiring on me, and I didn't want to have those moments of somebody walking through the hallway saying, you all are always complaining, you're just never happy, just be grateful that you're here. So I would be frustrated, and then I would look for a new job, and then I would leave. Because of my work history, because I was a peak performer, I was always able to get a job. And I would leave, and the company or the managers would be upset or be confused, and they wouldn't know why. And I didn't know how to properly communicate it at the time, how difficult it was to be a minority millennial, being the youngest person in my type of position, being the youngest person at the table, and often being the only minority in the building. I worked for some smaller companies where I was the only black person in the entire company, and I worked for some bigger companies, but I was the only black person in my department. So it was a very isolating feeling. You felt different. You felt like you don't fit in. You feel less than, and it's not very conducive to, having a safe work environment, where a place where you want to go every day. The reason I include this slide, so this is talking about how U.S. millennials are more likely to support censoring offensive statements about minorities. So microaggressions are those things, those intentional or unintentional things that are said based on typically stereotypes. But I wanted to include this because we are in a different climate right now where there are a lot of things happening politically and socially, and people are bringing those conversations to work. And I'm from St. Louis, Missouri, and I live in Ferguson. That's the neighborhood I live in, Ferguson. And when Michael Brown got shot and the Ferguson riots happened, it was a heavy time, especially for those of us that actually live in the neighborhood. I did not live in the neighborhood where he was shot. I lived in the neighborhood of houses like right next door. And to have to deal, with so many layers of what was going on, the hurt of the shooting, the frustration of the police, the rioting, the tear gas, being either locked in or locked out of the neighborhood because there was riot happening and the police had to shut all entryways down into our neighborhood, to not being able to open the doors because they started throwing tear gas. It was a hectic and heavy time. So then to go from there and to go to work and being the only black person there and then having conversations about it, either at the water cooler or in the break room or in front of my desk. And it never made sense to me how companies would have sexual harassment trainings saying that you can't, have sexually explicit conversations because if someone's offended and you keep having the conversation, that's sexual harassment. But you can stand in open areas and have racially explicit conversations and nobody says anything. I'm not supposed to say anything because that's freedom of speech, that's your opinion. But as a minority, I have to sit here and listen to people say, that animal got what he deserved. I hope they shoot all those thugs. I can't, what are they doing? Look at those animals. And be sitting there wondering, is that what you think about me? Because you're talking about people where I live that look like me. And now I have to sit in a meeting with you, or I have to work on a project with you, and how I now feel even more isolated than I was. I never really felt like I fitted. I never really felt like I deserved you to be here. But now I feel like there's a spotlight on me. And I'm worried that, do you say that about me? And I have to try and function in that environment. I have to try and work and be effective in that environment. And that it's difficult to do that. It's difficult to do that. And now I'm not saying you can't have conversations about current events in the workplace. Obviously I'm not saying you cannot have those conversations. But there has to be some measures taken, whether it's racial sensitivity, whether it's proper conduct at work, things that are appropriate or inappropriate to say. And a lot of people know what is or is not inappropriate to say, and some people just don't care. But if we're going to train people on things like sexual harassment, I think there should be a conversation had about, I don't know if it will be called racial harassment, but, have microaggressions and the proper things to say and not to say in the workplace when it comes to politics and current events and things like that. And that so much shaped my experience. So when I hear people attribute my work history to, oh, well, you're a millennial, lazy, entitled, disloyal, it's disheartening and frustrating because you're leaving out so much of my experience that caused me to go from job to job. You're leaving out so much of what I put up with and what I dealt with and how emotionally and mentally draining it was that caused me from go to job to job. The fact that there was no leadership to help me communicate the way I wanted to communicate. There was no one teaching me how to communicate with my colleagues on a professional level. There was no one there telling me that this was a safe place. You can come talk to me about what's going on. There was no one acknowledging what I was going through. So I would get frustrated and burnt out. And yes, I would leave. My 9 to 5, I had my corporate jobs. I had them for, average was a year to a year and a half. I would keep a corporate job. And, by the time I was done, I was just like burnt out and hurt and just frustrated. And it was like nobody knew. And partially that was my fault because I wasn't saying anything, but I didn't know what to say or how to say it at the time. So what can you do? As managers, as human resources professionals, what can you do to assist, engage, and retain your millennials, whether minority or otherwise? I would say that you need to implement some things based on what we value. We value a safe workplace, so not hostile. Like I said, whether it's sensitivity training, whether it's team building, so that your team can understand each other, something, just a safe work environment, open door policies for private discussions. A lot of people feel frustrated with things, feel offended by things, but they don't say anything because some people do not know how to handle these situations with tact. I think I've had maybe one position where I talked to the manager and they handled the situation without mentioning my name. Nobody wants to come to you to say, someone said something that offended me. And all you're going to do is go back and say, Kendra said you offended her, and we don't want any problems with this race thing. So please fix your attitude or fix what you're saying. So now that person is going to come back to me. So you told on me? Why are you so sensitive? And now we have a whole nother issue. So people often suffer in silence because there either isn't or they don't know that there is a safe way to communicate what's going on. So we want a safe workplace. We want to be able to contribute. We want our voices to be heard. It's not just enough to have a seat at the table. We want the opportunity to speak and be heard. This helps with that job versus career mindset. If I come to the table and I'm not able to speak, my ideas aren't adding to you, my experience and what I'm trying to contribute doesn't seem like it's worth anything, I'm really not going to look at this like a career. I'm going to look at it like a job, and I'm going to treat it like a job because that's how you're treating me. A place where we can grow. Also, the difference between a job and a career. A career helps people grow, gives them the opportunity to learn. If I'm in a place and there aren't any learning opportunities, there aren't any growth opportunities, then I am going to treat it like a job because that's what it is. A career is going to help me grow, help me to see this as a career by giving me those opportunities. Whether it be, I know a company that I worked for, they had something, I think it was called Lisa. And when I told them that I was interested in what other people did, they told me, there's this, it's like an online university thing. It's like we pay for it, you're able to go on there and learn about the different positions and learn some different skills that they use. That was an opportunity for me to grow and for me to learn. Mentoring programs. I think mentoring programs and having a mentoring culture is a huge opportunity that a lot of companies miss out on. Because if you think, millennials, we were involved in so much growing up. We were able to try and do different things. If you take the opportunity to let your millennials shadow someone in a different department, sit in on meetings and see what some other areas are, that's a way for you to say, if you do want a change of scenery, if you want a change in responsibility, there are opportunities and there are avenues for you to do that within the company instead of leaving the company. Because if you retain them from within and maybe you repurpose them to another position at some point, then they can always, train their replacement. That opens up so many doors because now I'm contributing by training someone and I'm moving up. And there are a number of millennials who said they would consider a lateral move, not just an upper move. So that is an opportunity. Mentoring and coaching, show them that there are other opportunities, show them that there are other avenues within the company, and that way you can retain them longer, and that helps build loyalty. Diversity, age, demographics, background, communication types, skills, learning abilities. All of these different things play a role in your diversity. It helps with creativity, it helps with productivity, it helps with breaking down walls and building camaraderie amongst the team, and all of that is important to us. All of that is important to millennials. I believe it's important to a lot of people, but especially millennials who want that type of diversity, and it's easier to feel like you fit in when there is more diversity because we have more common ground, as opposed to obviously if everyone is one type or this way or this way. And don't think of it, like I said, just as race, as background, as demographic, as neighborhoods. There are so many things that can play into diversity. But the biggest thing that you can do is be aware. Like I said, I was so frustrated with so many of the jobs that I had, and by the time that I left, I felt frustrated and sad and burnt out, and I also felt like nobody knew why. Nobody understood where I was coming from. Nobody took the time to ask where I was coming from and how my experience was and how I was being treated. And it's like they didn't care. And it wasn't until after I quit that I found out some people did care. And, human resources or my manager's manager or someone would reach out to me and say, Kendra, wait, what is going on? I felt like by the time I was ready to quit, it was like I was so frustrated, I was so burnt out, and I was like, nobody even sees it. Nobody sees how frustrating it can be to have to deal with this. Nobody sees the microaggressions. Nobody sees the racism. And you feel alone. So one of the biggest things you can do as managers, one of the biggest things you can do as HR professionals is make yourself aware of the differences in the groups and break down those barriers. Get rid of these biases of millennials and all this lazy and titles and all that stuff, and acknowledge that if someone has those characteristics, it could be stemming from somewhere else other than their age group. So thank you again so much for having me, and I hope this was helpful.